The Dominion had planned everything perfectly. Their war council had studied humanity for decades, watching their expansion across the stars, analyzing their weaknesses. Unlike the great empires of the galaxy, humans lacked an ancient heritage, a legacy of conquest. They were young, reckless, and fragile. So, when the order came, the Dominion fleets moved in like a steel cage snapping shut. Every hyperspace route leading to Earth and its colonies was sealed. Every trade lane was patrolled by warships. The blockade was absolute. No reinforcements, no supplies, no escape. The Dominion had seen other species crumble under such pressure, surrendering without a fight. They expected humanity to do the same. But the days stretched into weeks, and the expected collapse never came. Instead, humanity remained defiant, silent but unbroken. Something was wrong. Admiral X-Zero sat in the command center of the Zitrax Prime, the Dominion's flagship, reviewing the latest reports. Patrol routes were intact. Every entry and exit point remained sealed. There was no conceivable way for Earth's forces to resist for long. Food shortages should have begun crippling their cities. Fuel and weapons stockpiles should have started running dry. Yet, surveillance drones showed no signs of distress. No riots. No panic. No desperate attempts to break through the blockade. It was as if humanity wasn't struggling at all. Zeros frowned. Something was missing. His reptilian fingers tightened around the edges of his console. Then came the first disturbance. A Dominion supply freighter, fully stocked and en route to the outer blockade perimeter, vanished without a trace. No distress call, no wreckage, nothing. The Dominion assumed it was a mechanical failure, an isolated incident. But then it happened again. And again. Within a single week, 5 ships disappeared. The blockade was supposed to strangle humanity, but now the Dominion's own fleets were losing resources faster than expected. To counter this, the Dominion dispatched additional warships to escort their supply lines. The first convoy under heavy guard made it halfway before their lead battleship lost contact. When reinforcements arrived, they found the ship floating lifelessly and space crew missing, systems fried, weapons untouched. It was as if something had slipped aboard, silently eliminating everyone inside without a single shot fired. The security footage recovered from the wreck sent chills through the Dominion officers. Blurry figures moving in the shadows, human shapes slipping through the halls with unnatural precision. But how? There had been no breaches, no alarms triggered. The ship had been patrolled and locked down. How were humans getting inside? Panic spread among the lower ranks. Dominion captains became paranoid, doubling security, running full system scans, yet the disappearances continued. Now entire patrol groups were going missing, not just supply ships. The Dominion started to realize the truth: humanity wasn't waiting for the blockade to weaken. They were already inside it. Somehow, they had infiltrated the Dominion's own fleets, and no one knew where they would strike next. Zeros could feel control slipping through his fingers. Every step they took to tighten the noose around humanity's throat only made it worse. Ships would check in 1 hour, then go completely silent the next. Some crews reported hearing whispers in their own comm channels, human voices in the darkness, taunting them. Others claimed their weapons systems refused to fire, overridden by an unseen force. The Dominion's blockade wasn't just failing, it was turning against them. Finally, a Dominion scout vessel picked up a faint distress call. One of their lost patrols, drifting in a debris field. Zeros personally ordered the recovery team. When the rescue ships arrived, they found the patrol ship intact but dark. No life signs. Just one transmission looped on repeat. You thought you had us cornered. You should have made sure we were defenseless first. Zeros stared at the message, his claws digging into the metal armrest of his command chair. The blockade had become a battlefield in ways the Dominion had never imagined. Humanity wasn't waiting to be crushed. They were already fighting back, and the Dominion had no idea how to stop them. Admiral X-Zero stood motionless inside the Dominion flagship, Zitrax Prime, staring at the holographic map of the blockade. Thousands of warships, positioned like an iron cage around humanity's homeworld, yet something was terribly wrong. The blockade was supposed to crush human resistance, to starve their planets and force their surrender. Yet the Dominion fleets were the ones suffering. Ships were vanishing, patrols were going dark, and supply lines were crumbling. The reports made no sense. No battles had been fought. There was no debris, no wreckage, no sign of enemy warships breaking through. It was as if the Dominion's own fleet was being hollowed out from within. But how? Every Dominion ship was equipped with advanced scanners, security drones, and biometric locks. Even a single human boarding party should have been detected and eliminated instantly. And yet, it was happening. The fear among the officers was growing. Rumors whispered through the ranks that the humans had found a way to become invisible. Zeros refused to believe it. He demanded answers. He ordered every ship to conduct internal sweeps, scan for life signs, and double their security. But the results were the same nothing. The Dominion was fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Then, an intercepted transmission changed everything. It came from a Dominion battleship that had gone missing 2 days earlier. The message was fragmented, filled with static, but one thing was clear: the crew had been under attack. The audio was chilling. Doors hissing open without warning. Lights flickering. Crew members gasping in shock before their voices were cut off mid-sentence. Then silence. No weapons fire. No alarms. Just a slow, creeping horror that consumed the entire ship. The last words captured in the transmission sent a shiver through every officer who heard them. They're already inside. Zeros clenched his fists. This was no ordinary war. The Dominion had always relied on brute force, overwhelming fleets, planetary bombardments, and superior numbers. But this was different. Humanity wasn't engaging in direct combat. They were striking from the shadows, dismantling the blockade piece by piece, without ever showing themselves. But how were they getting aboard Dominion ships? How were they disabling entire vessels without a single shot fired? The answer came unexpectedly. A Dominion engineer, paranoid from the rising disappearances, ran a deep diagnostic on his ship's internal systems. What he found sent an immediate distress call to Fleet Command. The Dominion's own security systems had been compromised. Every biometric lock, every firewall, every emergency override had been silently rewritten. The humans weren't boarding ships through force. They were already inside the systems themselves. Zeros felt a cold dread settle over him. It was impossible. Dominion's cybersecurity was considered unbreakable, yet the humans had hacked into it as if it were nothing. That was why ships were failing, why weapons refused to fire, why entire crews were being eliminated before they even knew they were under attack. The humans weren't just infiltrating physically. They had turned the Dominion's own technology against them. With every new realization, the situation grew more desperate. If the humans could control Dominion systems, then no ship was truly safe. They could open airlocks at will, shut down life support, disable hyperdrives in the middle of deep space. They weren't fighting the Dominion's fleet. They were dismantling it. Panic spread like wildfire. Captains refused to trust their own ships. Security teams began tearing apart control panels, searching for any sign of human interference. But it was useless. The modifications weren't physical. They were embedded in the very code running the Dominion ships. And no one knew how to remove them. Then, the worst news arrived. A high-priority Dominion supply fleet, one of the few remaining lifelines keeping the blockade operational, was suddenly unable to navigate. Every single ship reported the same error. Their navigation systems had been locked. Someone had rewritten their jump coordinates. They were trapped. Moments later, distress signals flared. Something was happening to the crews. The humans had already infiltrated the fleet. Zeros watched in horror as one by one the ships went dark. No explosions. No battles. Just silence. As if the fleet had simply stopped existing. Zeros felt his breathing grow heavy. This was no longer a blockade. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time. The Dominion, an empire that had crushed countless civilizations, was now being hunted by the very species they had sought to break. No one knew where the next attack would come from. No one knew how to stop it. Humanity was no longer trapped inside the blockade. The Dominion was, and the unseen hand of their enemy was closing around them, tighter and tighter. Admiral Xero stood in the dim glow of the command deck, his sharp eyes locked onto the swirling mass of red alerts covering the holographic display. Every fleet under his command was experiencing the same nightmare: ships vanishing, supply lines crumbling, entire battalions lost without a single recorded battle. The Dominion had come to this war expecting an easy victory, but now they were the ones being hunted. It was an unbearable thought. The Dominion had never feared any species before. They had always been the conquerors, the supreme force in the galaxy. Yet, against humanity, everything was unraveling. Xero's claws tapped against the metal railing as he watched another patrol fleet flicker off the display. No distress signals. No wreckage. Just gone. Desperate for answers, the Dominion sent their best strike force to track down the hidden human fleet. A group of elite warships, heavily armed and carrying the most advanced tracking technology, was dispatched deep into the blockade zone. Their mission was simple: hunt down the human warships and eliminate them. The fleet moved cautiously, scanning every sector, expecting a traditional battle. But what they found was something else entirely. The battlefield was already waiting for them. The first sign of trouble came when one of their scout vessels suddenly reported a malfunction. Their sensors had picked up movement human ships, just at the edge of their vision, but before they could lock on, their systems shut down. The captain's voice crackled over the comms, confusion turning into panic. Then silence. When the Dominion's main fleet arrived at the scout ship's last known coordinates, all they found was a lifeless hull, drifting in the dark. No signs of struggle. No external damage. Just an empty vessel, its entire crew missing. The Dominion forces tightened their formation, their ships moving in close to protect one another. But then the lights flickered. One of the warships reported a sudden power failure. Then another. And another. Weapons refused to fire. Communication systems went silent. They weren't being attacked. They were being dismantled from the inside. Shadows moved in the corridors. Doors hissed open when they shouldn't have. Crew members turned, expecting to see their own soldiers, only to be met with something else. Something unseen. Something already inside their ships. A cold dread settled over every Dominion officer. This wasn't a normal battle. They weren't chasing the humans. The humans were leading them. Xeros received fragmented reports from the strike force. Static-filled messages, voices filled with confusion and fear. They're inside. We don't know how. Then another voice, filled with sheer terror. The ship isn't ours anymore. The Dominion ships had always been fortresses of steel, impenetrable and secure. But now, they were cages. One by one, the warships went dark. By the time reinforcements arrived, the once mighty strike force had been reduced to nothing. No survivors. No explanations. Just empty ships floating silently in space. The Dominion's confidence shattered. Officers refused to leave their personal quarters. Soldiers patrolled their own ships with their weapons drawn, afraid of their own shadows. Every Dominion captain now knew the truth: humanity was never trapped inside the blockade. The Dominion was. What was supposed to be a hunt had become a massacre, and the worst part was, no one knew how the humans were doing it. Then came the final blow. Reports flooded in from across the blockade. Entire Dominion fleets were losing control of their own ships. Engines locked. Hyperdrives jammed. Doors refusing to open. The humans had infiltrated the Dominion's entire network, turning their technology against them. They weren't just hacking individual ships. They were controlling the entire fleet. Panic spread like wildfire. Captains ordered emergency shutdowns, hoping to stop the humans from overriding their systems. It didn't matter. The trap had already closed. And then, out of the darkness, the true human fleet arrived. Warships, fully armed and ready for battle, emerging from the void like predators closing in on weakened prey. The Dominion blockade, once thought to be an unbreakable wall, had become a graveyard. And the hunters, once so sure of their victory, had become the hunted. Admiral Exiros stood frozen on the command deck of Zetrax Prime, his cold-blooded heart pounding with an unfamiliar sensation fear. The once mighty Dominion fleet, which had surrounded Earth in an impenetrable blockade, was crumbling like dry leaves in a storm. Reports from across the sector painted a horrifying picture. Entire battle groups had vanished. Patrols sent to investigate found nothing but empty ships, lifeless husks adrift in the void. There was no sign of battle, no wreckage, no survivors. The Dominion's iron grip on humanity was slipping, and no one knew how to stop it. The war had changed. It was no longer a campaign of conquest. It was a hunt. And humanity was the predator. The Dominion's greatest mistake had been assuming that humans would fight like every other species they had conquered, that they would break under pressure, surrender when outnumbered. But instead of waiting for their doom, humanity had turned the blockade into a battlefield. Dominion ships were being shut down from the inside, their systems hijacked. No alarms. No distress calls. Just silence, creeping through the fleet like a shadow. Every attempt to counter the human infiltration had failed. Security teams were found missing without a trace, their weapons still in their hands. Engineers who tried to reset the ship's systems never reported back. Entire Dominion warships were going dark, one by one, without a single shot fired. Zeros clenched his fists, his claws scraping against the armrest of his chair. He refused to believe that his fleet, the most advanced armada in the galaxy, was being dismantled by an enemy they couldn't even see. He had ordered every Dominion ship to go into lockdown, no internal communications, no data transfers. But it was too late. The moment the order was sent, the Dominion's central command network collapsed. The screens on the bridge flickered, the once bright displays now overridden with static. The artificial intelligence running the ship stuttered, glitching as if something or someone had taken control. And then, for the first time since the blockade had begun, a human voice echoed across the Dominion fleet. "You thought you trapped us." Zeros' eyes widened. The voice was calm, almost amused. It wasn't coming from, but the trap was never for us. The Dominion officers stood in stunned silence as the gravity of the situation became clear. They were the ones trapped. Zeros had thought his blockade had sealed humanity inside, cutting them off from the galaxy. But humanity had never needed to escape. They had spent the entire time setting the perfect ambush. The blockade had been a noose, but not around humanity's neck. It was around the Dominion's throat. And now it was tightening. Alarms blared. The bridge crew scrambled, desperately trying to regain control, but the systems no longer obeyed them. Weapons were locking onto friendly ships. Engines were shutting down. Hyperdrives were offline. The Dominion fleet was now helpless. And then, out of the void, human warships emerged. Not weak, starving vessels trying to break free, but fully armed. They had waited for this moment, for the Dominion to be completely vulnerable. And now, the slaughter would begin. The first Dominion battleship exploded before anyone could react. The second was disabled, its engines cut, leaving it dead in space. Dominion warships, once feared across the galaxy, were now nothing more than easy targets. The humans didn't just attack, they dismantled the fleet systematically, eliminating command ships first, severing all lines of coordination. Dominion captains, panicked and desperate, tried to fight back, but their own ships refused to obey them. Their weapons wouldn't fire. Their shields wouldn't raise. Some even found their own security doors, sealing them inside their bridges, locking them out of control. It was as if their ships had turned against them. On the command deck of Zetrax Prime, Exiros felt true terror for the first time in his life. He had always believed in the Dominion's superiority, in their unstoppable might. But now, as he watched his fleet disintegrate, he understood the truth: they had never truly been in control. Humanity had played them from the start, leading them deeper and deeper into a war they didn't even realize they had already lost. Zeros turned, barking orders, demanding the fleet retreat. But it was too late. The blockade had become a massacre. The humans had sprung the trap, and now they were the ones deciding who would leave this battlefield alive. Admiral Exiros had always believed in control. Control over his fleet, over the Dominion, over the weak species they had conquered across the stars. But as he stood in the shattered ruins of his command deck, listening to the desperate, panicked cries of his officers, he realized something horrifying. There was no control left. The Dominion blockade was gone, torn apart not by brute force, but by something far worse. The humans had not just defeated them, they had shattered the illusion of Dominion superiority. And now, the fear was spreading like a wildfire. Across the Dominion's vast empire, word of the catastrophe at the blockade was leaking through the cracks. Despite strict communication lockdowns, despite threats of execution for anyone who spoke of the disaster, the whispers could not be silenced. Entire fleets had been erased. The greatest warships of the Dominion had been reduced to drifting wrecks, lifeless husks floating in the void. And worst of all, no one knew how. The stories spreading through Dominion space were more terrifying than the reality. Some claimed that humanity had discovered a weapon that could erase ships without leaving a trace. Others believed the humans had summoned some ancient force from the void, something that consumed anything that stood in its way. The most horrifying rumor of all, however, was the simplest: humanity was inside the Dominion already. Captains in distant star systems began reporting strange malfunctions, doors opening and closing on their own, weapons locking onto friendly ships, navigation systems rewriting their courses without command. Some dismissed these reports as paranoia, the result of nervous officers jumping at shadows. But then the disappearances began. Ships sent on routine patrols never returned. Supply lines that had functioned for centuries suddenly collapsed, with no sign of an attack. Entire space stations went dark overnight, their last transmissions filled with nothing but static and faint, unintelligible whispers. The Dominion's once mighty soldiers, who'd spent centuries marching across the stars, began to fear the dark. Every shadow in the corridors of their ships became a threat. Every flicker of a screen sent a chill down their spine. They didn't know where the enemy was. They didn't know when the next strike would come. And worst of all, they didn't know if the war had already been lost. High Command issued orders to tighten security, to increase patrols, to hunt down the humans hiding within their systems. But how do you hunt something you cannot see? How do you fight an enemy that does not engage in battle, that does not leave bodies behind, that does not even announce its presence? Fear turned into paranoia. Dominion officers began turning on their own crews. Captains executed engineers who so much as hesitated at their stations, convinced they were human spies. Admirals ordered entire sectors to be purged, destroying ships they suspected had been compromised. But it did not stop the fear. It only fed it. The Dominion was tearing itself apart, not because of an invasion, not because of a great battle, but because of the terror of not knowing how they were being destroyed. On Zitrax Prime, the beating heart of the Dominion's empire, the capital city burned with riots. The civilians, once obedient and unquestioning, had heard the whispers too. If the Great Fleet could not stop humanity, then what hope did anyone have? The government called for order, for patience, but their voices were drowned out by the panic. The people had seen what happened to the blockade. They had watched the Dominion's greatest leaders fall silent, their fleets vanish. They had seen what happened to those who stood against humanity. And now, they no longer believed the Dominion could protect them. The fear spread to the highest ranks of the Dominion's leadership. Once proud warlords who had crushed civilizations now sat in silence, their claws trembling over their datapads. Their fleets were vast, their armies unmatched, but none of it mattered anymore. Weapons were useless against an enemy that had already won before the battle even began. Some whispered of surrender, of offering peace before it was too late. Others called for desperate measures: burn every world humanity has touched, wipe them out before they can strike again. But no one dared give the order. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. The war was over. The Dominion had spent centuries ruling with fear, making every species tremble before them. But now, they were the ones who could not sleep at night. They were the ones checking over their shoulders, expecting the whisper of a human voice in the darkness. They had hunted humanity, surrounded them, trapped them only to realize too late that they had walked into the trap instead. And as the fear spread through the highest halls of power, This was only the beginning.